Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking some truly mind-blowing historical evidence. We're looking at the very real possibility that beer wasn't just some fun byproduct of early civilization, but actually its foundational catalyst. It's an absolutely fascinating look at how something you can grab at the corner store today might have literally shaped the entire fabric of human history.
So let's jump right in with a pretty provocative question. For generations, the standard history book narrative has been super straightforward, right? Early humans realized they needed a stable food source, so they invented agriculture, settled down, and boom, civilization. But what if that foundation wasn't driven by a need for food, but rather the desire for a drink? What if securing a steady buzz was the actual prime motivator that pulled us right out of the Stone Age? It completely flips the script on everything we thought we knew about our ancestors.
Section 1. The happy accident, a fortunate collision of nature. Because, as it turns out, ancient hunter-gatherers didn't exactly huddle up in a makeshift lab and intentionally invent beer. No, they literally just stumbled upon it. The leading historical consensus points to this incredibly specific yet totally accidental chain of events. Step 1. You've got some gathered wild grains, like early barley or wheat, sitting in a container, and they just happen to get soaked by the rain. That moisture triggers germination, which is absolutely key because it converts the starches in the grain into fermentable sugars. Step 2. Wild yeast, which is just naturally floating around in the air everywhere, settles into this warm, wet mixture and starts feeding on those new sugars. And then, step 3. Well, magic. Chemical magic anyway. The yeast produces alcohol and carbon dioxide. And when some exceptionally brave or maybe just really thirsty person finally tasted this bubbling, fermenting bowl of mush, they discovered a mildly intoxicating, heavily nutritious gruel.
Moving on to Section 2, Beer Before Bread, Rewriting the Agricultural Timeline.
This brings us to a massive chicken and egg scenario. Did we invent bread or beer first? For the longest time, the prevailing wisdom was, well, obviously bread came first as vital sustenance, right? And beer was just a luxury they figured out later. But recent archaeological evidence is forcing us to ask this exact question all over again.
The answer to that question actually revolves around a staggering number, 13,000. Back in 2018, archaeologists exploring the Raqefet Cave in modern-day Israel made this unbelievable discovery. They found physical, undeniable evidence of beer brewing by the semi-nomadic Natufian culture. And that evidence dates back an astonishing 13,000 years.
Think about that for a second. Early brewing predates the agricultural revolution by millennia. That is absolutely huge. It means humans were actively brewing beer thousands of years before we even started farming on a large scale. These people were semi-nomadic, meaning they were constantly on the move, yet they were dedicating significant time, resources, and effort just to make beer.
So this brings up a massive paradigm shift. You've got the old theory: humans invented agriculture to ensure a steady supply of food, just basic survival. But contrast that with the new hypothesis, what experts call the beer before bread hypothesis. It suggests that early humans actually stopped wandering and settled down to farm, specifically to ensure a steady supply of grain for beer making. The primary motivation wasn't necessarily calories to stay alive, it was to keep the tap flowing on this mildly intoxicating, socially binding beverage.
Let's look at Section 3. Brewing a Civilization, from semi-nomadic brews to Mesopotamian empires.
If we trace the timeline, we start 13,000 years ago with the Natufians brewing the earliest known beer. They were the real pioneers. But skip forward to around 4000 BCE, and we hit the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia. The Sumerians took what the Natufians started and turned brewing into an absolute pillar of their society. I mean, it wasn't just a drink, it was literally their economy. Beer was so deeply woven into daily life that it was actually used as a daily wage. Imagine clocking out of a hard day's labor and your boss hands you a jug of beer as your paycheck. And the societal obsession culminated around 1800 BCE with a pretty remarkable piece of literature.
That literature was dedicated to Ninkasi, the ancient Sumerian goddess of brewing. Yeah, beer was so vital that they didn't just drink it, they worshipped it. They elevated the whole brewing process to a divine act, overseen by her very own specific deity.
Which brings us to the Hymn to Ninkasi. It's a mythological poem that actually doubles as the world's oldest surviving beer recipe. Written around 1800 BCE, this wasn't just some beautiful song of praise. It was a highly practical, step-by-step manual passed down through generations. The hymn details exactly how to soak malted grain and bake a special kind of beer bread called bapper, which was used specifically to ferment the brew. It's this gorgeous fusion of ancient religion and very practical chemistry.
But hey, before you get too jealous of them, Section 4, Ancient Beer was Sludge, a Visceral Reality Check.
Because let's be real, ancient beer was pretty unappetizing by modern standards. First off, it was completely uncarbonated. No refreshing fizz whatsoever. Second, they didn't really filter the liquid, so the brew was essentially a thick, cloudy sludge. Third, it was absolutely packed with floating grain husks. And finally, remember that beer bread or bapper we just talked about? Yeah, the beer contained literal chunks of soggy leftover bread floating around in it. It was honestly less of a crisp beverage and a lot more like a hearty alcoholic soup.
So how do you drink a chunky, husky sludge without choking to death? Well, you get creative. To bypass all that floating debris and avoid literally having to chew their beer, the Sumerians drank communally from massive pots using long reeds as natural straws. They'd insert them deep into the vessel to suck up the liquid from way below that floating layer of husks and bread. So drinking was this highly social communal experience just centered around a giant pot of fermented sludge.
It's just an absolutely incredible journey, isn't it? Going from an accidental, rain-soaked bowl of mush all the way to a divine beverage that functioned as currency, and maybe, just maybe, served as the primary motivation for humanity to settle down and invent agriculture in the first place. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. Next time you take a sip of your favorite brew, ask yourself, are you just drinking a beverage, or are you tasting the very catalyst of human civilization? Really makes you wonder how many other massive leaps forward in our history started with a happy accident and a serious thirst. Thanks for joining me to explore this today, and I'll catch you in the next one.